Alright guys, welcome to the Wednesday direction video. First day of notes, so obviously today we're going to run through the beginning of our Rome notes, kind of cover a lot of the stuff that you A, read about on Monday, or B, watched yesterday with the Carthage video. So we're going to cover some of those topics again, mainly the Punic War because it is really important. It's kind of the dividing line between the Roman Republic kind of thriving, and then kind of after the Punic Wars, we start to see the collapse of the Roman Republic, and we're going to see the beginning of the Roman Empire. All right. I also threw in some interesting stories as well. So on the back half of the notes, we're going to be kind of flipping through a couple of topics, just because they're kind of interesting, and we're also going to kind of set the stage a little bit moving forward. All right. So let's just get into it here. So here's the learning targets for today. We got 3 of them that we're going to try to go through, so make sure you're kind of keeping these in the back of your mind. You guys remember that 4, 3, 2, 1 scale we had in here? As long as you can kind of answer these questions, you'll be just fine. All right. With that being said, here's the vocab for today. A lot of this vocab was also in your reading guide on Monday, and also some of these things were talked about in the video, right? Like the ship there from the Carthaginian ship, and some other things. Oops, I'm skipping around. Okay, today let's just dive into it then. Now, with the geography of Rome, we want to know a few things, okay? We know that it's surrounded, right, by water, by these different seas, okay? So when Rome becomes really powerful, it becomes a big trading hub, right? It's kind of going to become the spot to trade. So Rome's going to become really wealthy thanks to the sea trade. All right. Now, also, the sea is a great natural boundary, right? It's tough to cross the sea. You can't just cross the sea and attack Rome whenever you want. Okay, it takes time, takes planning. Just basically gives Rome an advantage. Obviously, Romans have a great navy because they know that they need to control the seas to get a lot of money. Okay, it's simple as that. Now in the north here, we have the Alps, right? The Swiss Alps here, there's Switzerland right there. So we have the Swiss Alps there. Another natural boundary because it's mountains, all right? So actually Rome is pretty safe. It kind of has all these nice natural boundaries that make it hard to attack. No, not impossible to attack. We'll see that with Hannibal, right? But it makes it a little bit more difficult. All right, so let's just keep that in mind as we're moving forward here, because that plays a role. The geography always plays a role, especially early on. All right, so let's just get into it here. All right, the founding story of Rome is one of the more famous ones. You guys have to know it for the quiz. It's the story of Romulus and Remus, one of the more famous stories of Roman time. So it's the beginning. So you have these 2 brothers, Romulus and Remus. I'll do the short version because we're not going to have a lot of time here. Basically, these 2 brothers are supposed to be ruling, or the next rulers of this empire, but their uncle's kind of greedy, and their uncle wants to have the power to himself. So to do that, he has to have these 2 children killed. All right, so what he does is he basically puts them in a basket and kind of sends them down the river. And when they're down the river, they end up getting caught up in the reeds there, and they don't end up dying. All right. Now they're crying because they're kids, and a she-wolf comes into play, and the she-wolf kind of takes them in and nurtures them as their own, as you kind of can see here from the art piece. All right. So they get nursed back to health. A farmer comes by, sees the 2 kids, takes them in, kind of raises them as his own. So the 2 kids get kind of famous in their village for what they do is they attack bandits. So robbers come into the village, and what ends up happening is the 2 brothers and their pals always end up kind of robbing the bandits. It's like a Robin Hood situation. So they steal from the bad guy, and they give all the money to the people in their town. So they get pretty famous. All right. Long story short, eventually they have the chance to rule the empire they once came from, but they decide to start their own city, start their own empire. So now Rome is famous for its hills. All right, I think it's 7 hills. Okay, the city of 7 hills. So the hills are pretty famous in Rome. So they play a part here. So when they're deciding on where to build this new city, Romulus wants to build on this hill, and Remus wants to build on this hill. And they can't decide which hill to build on. Well, eventually this spills over, and Romulus and Remus start to fight, and Romulus ends up killing Remus. All right, so with Remus out of the picture, Romulus picks the hill, and he names the city after himself, the city of Rome. All right, and that's the founding story of Rome. Is it true? Probably not. Is it a good story? Yeah, and it's ingrained in their culture. Okay, for example, the soccer team in Rome, Roma, their like logo, their badge has the she-wolf in it. All right, so it's still very much around. I still think you can see like manhole covers. They'll have the she-wolf emblem in it. I believe even their money at one point had the she-wolf on it. So it's a pretty, it's ingrained deep into their culture there. The story of Romulus and Remus. All right, and you're gonna have to know that. You have to know that story. I'll probably put a little video link, like a 3-minute video, just an animated one. So if you want to go into deeper, I gave you the really short story. So if you want to go in deeper, I'll kind of have that available for you tomorrow. We're not going to talk about the Etruscans much. We're going to kind of skip through them. But we are going to start now with the Roman Republic. Like I said yesterday, Rome basically is 2 parts. You have the Roman Republic, then something happens, and then you have the Roman Empire. So we're going to kind of get to that right here. So with the Republic, you don't have one leader like you would with an empire. You have, very democratic system. So you can see here from yesterday a little bit too, you got some common themes or some reoccurring vocab words. We have the 2 consuls, the rulers of Rome. Basically, like 2 presidents, they take turns each day, especially in battle. Basically taking turns ruling Rome, right? It's kind of its own checks and balances. Next, we have the Senate. These are people who are going to represent the patricians, are basically just the wealthy people of Rome. And then we have the tribal assembly, who they're going to represent the plebeians, or the plebes, which are just kind of like everybody else. The urban poor, the rural poor, farmers, merchants, just basically anybody who's not from the wealthy status. All right, so obviously these 2 groups are going to butt heads all the time because the patricians are going to want to keep all the power, and the tribal assembly is going to try to always be taking some power and giving it to the plebeians. But it's tough to have someone give up all their power, right? Especially if they've had it forever. So here's kind of the main things to keep an eye on for the Republic. There's other things too that we could talk about, like this whole list right here. But for us, the only ones really we're going to focus on is the consuls. So if you want to jot the consuls down in your note, do that. Dictator, obviously, because that's going to play a role here. And then tribunes, and then the Senate. And I'm let my fingers go off it, so hopefully it moves my cursor out of the way so you can jot that down. And it says almost always patricians at the end there for the Senate. So jot down those 3 because they're going to come up a lot. Not just today, but obviously later on as well. All right. So we get the introduction of this thing called the 12 tables. And the 12 tables are just basically set up to help give more rights to the plebeians. It's going to make sure, just basic civil rights. Because at this time, the plebeians are really being exploited by the patricians, and it's leading to some internal conflict between the 2 groups, like I said. So you can read through the 12 tables if you want, but the overarching theme is just giving them more protection, right? Having laws in place to make sure that the plebeians have a better way of life and they're not being taken advantage of so much by the patricians. All right, and then there's obviously some other ones that are involved as well, like just kind of odd ones, like this one right here, right? A dead man shall not be buried or burned within the city, because at this point they're having so many deaths that the city was starting to stink and there was really no room for graveyards. So some odd ones in there, but also some other ones that just, help you out. All right, the Roman Forum is very similar to what we saw in Greece. This is where people would go and conversate politically. You would find a lot of, even the consuls would be there sometimes, giving their side of things or kind of their reasoning for different decisions. But it was an open forum. You could go there and you could definitely have your voice heard. And a lot of people did, obviously. The early road system for Rome plays a big factor because with them being surrounded by the sea and having all these ports, you have to be able to get your goods from one end of the Roman Empire to the other, and so we get this Roman road system set up. Eventually, it's going to become the Appa Way, is what it's going to be named, and it's going to become one of the more famous road systems. It's going to have, it's not just dirt, right? They're going to have actual material, kind of like, I don't know, cobblestone street. Like if you think about like maybe like old school Boston streets, for example. I don't know why that came to my head, but that's just a cobble street. So you'll actually have some stuff on there where allow your soldiers to move up and down the empire faster, materials, goods, and time is money when we're talking about selling and buying things. So the road plays a big factor in Rome being able to be so wealthy. All right. Now, the other big empire of the time is Carthage, and this is what we looked at yesterday. So Rome is a big economic power, so is Carthage. Now, the odd thing is that Rome actually has a pretty good army navy. Carthage doesn't really have a good army or navy. They just happen to have really good leaders that really get the best out of their army. And we'll see that coming up here. All right, this is for sure going to be a two-part video, by the way, so just a heads up on that. So this brings us to the First Punic War that we saw yesterday. So the First Punic War, it's going to be fought between Carthage and Rome. That's a test question. Who fights in the Punic Wars? Rome and Carthage. Okay. Because there's just not enough money to go around. There probably is, but you know how it goes with these empires. You want more. All right. So the First Punic War, it's going to be fought over Sicily. And Sicily's right here. It's the boot kicking Sicily. Sicily would be the ball. Now the question is, why would Sicily be such an important piece to all this? Well, Sicily is actually like the #1 trading hub in the Mediterranean Sea. As you can see here, it's kind of right smack dab in the middle. So all the shipping lanes end up going through Sicily at one point or another. So if you can control Sicily, you can control the Mediterranean. AKA, if you control Sicily, you're going to get really, really rich. All right. So the First Punic War, I'm not going to kind of spare you guys too much. There's this guy who's the leader of the Carthage Empire. His name is Hamilcar Barca, and he's going to be the dad of one of the more famous leaders in the history of the world, and that's Hannibal. So Hamilcar, right now, he ends up fighting. He ends up losing. So what ends up happening at the end of the First Punic War is that Rome wins. They get control of the Mediterranean. Also, they're going to make Carthage pay war reparations, which means that you're basically going to be like, oh, we won the war, now you're going to pay for it, because wars are expensive. And so normally what happens, even in like World War I and World War II, the team that wins or the side that wins normally forces the losing side to pay for it. All right. I think I was in college like in 2010 when like World War I or World War II, I think it was World War I officially ended when Germany made its last payment. All right. So these war reparations hurt your country kind of big time, especially if you're struggling after a war. All right. The next part 2 in this whole thing, we're going to talk about the Second Punic War, the Third Punic War, and we're going to cover the rest of the notes. I'm going to stop now because the Second Punic War obviously is the big battle or the big part of the war. There's 3 parts in it, and part 2 is where I would say like 80% of the action is. So I'm going to pause here now, and then I'll just start up again for part 2. So a little bit longer of notes. Obviously, that's expected. We're talking about Rome here. Okay, we can't really just fly through this stuff. Obviously, Rome, one of the bigger empires in the history of the world. It's going to take some time to kind of go through it. So I'll pause now, and I'll pick back up in a second.